My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and right now I am a board-certified neurosurgeon in Boston. The night before my medical school interview, my sister poured industrial bleach over my only professional blazer. My parents told me to stop making a scene. I wore that ruined jacket to the interview anyway. The dean stared at the bleached stains, then down at my last name on his paperwork. His entire expression shifted. "Wait, are you her granddaughter?" he asked, his voice shaking. I had no idea that wearing a ruined piece of clothing would expose a $10 million theft orchestrated by my own family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a family who tried to destroy your future. 10 years ago, I was 23 and desperate to get into medical school. We lived in a massive opulent estate in the wealthiest suburb of Boston. My parents, Richard and Patricia, ran a highly lucrative financial firm. They paraded their wealth at country club galas and charity dinners, always making sure they looked like the perfect upper-class family. But behind closed doors, their affection was entirely reserved for my younger sister, Brittany. She was 20 at the time, majoring in partying and relying entirely on my parents' credit cards. I was the family scapegoat because I refused to fall in line and join my father and his accounting firm. I wanted to heal people. My father called it a pathetic medical fantasy that paid pennies compared to corporate finance. They refused to pay a single cent toward my college education. I worked overnight shifts at a local diner and tutored underclassmen just to afford my textbooks and rent for my tiny off-campus apartment. For the month before my big interview, my apartment building had a severe plumbing issue, forcing me to temporarily move back into my childhood bedroom at my parents' estate. It was a miserable arrangement. Every dinner felt like an intense interrogation. My mother would criticize my tired eyes, asking why I could not be more radiant and carefree like Brittany. She constantly reminded me that I was wasting my youth on studying instead of finding a wealthy husband. I ignored their harsh taunts, focusing entirely on my ultimate goal. The night before my interview at the state medical program, I was in my childhood bedroom preparing my outfit. I did not have money for a tailored suit. All I had was a vintage blazer I had found packed away in the dusty attic years ago. It was a classic structured navy blue piece, beautifully tailored with the initials JM embroidered subtly on the inner collar. I did not know much about the monogram at the time, only that it had belonged to my late grandmother Josephine. I had spent hours carefully washing and pressing the fabric, ensuring it looked immaculate. It was my protective armor. I laid it out on my bed, feeling a rare surge of immense pride and confidence. I was reviewing my application notes when the bedroom door swung open without a simple knock. Brittany sauntered in holding a large plastic cup that smelled overwhelmingly of toxic chemicals. She wore a smug, entitled grin, looking from me to my carefully prepared interview clothes. Without a single word, she tilted the cup forward. A harsh, acidic wave of industrial bleach splashed directly onto my navy blazer. The dark fabric instantly began to fizz and hiss, rapidly turning a sickly, mottled orange. I gasped, lunging forward to grab the jacket, but the terrible damage was already done. The chemical burned my bare fingertips, and the pungent smell filled the small room, choking my lungs. "What is wrong with you?" I yelled, holding up the ruined fabric. Brittany just laughed, tossing the empty plastic cup onto the hardwood floor. "Oops," she said, her tone dripping with absolute fake innocence. "Maybe you should just skip the interview tomorrow. You know Mom and Dad already paid the admissions board to look at my pre-med application instead. They do not have enough money to bribe them for both of us." The sheer audacity of her statement froze me completely in place. Brittany had failed her basic biology classes twice. She partied every weekend and barely showed up to her morning lectures. Yet my parents were actively bribing the medical school board to secure a spot for her while I was working myself to the bone to earn it legitimately. And now she was destroying my only professional outfit just to ensure I could not compete with her. I looked down at the ruined blazer, the only remaining legacy of our grandmother now reeking of bleach and pure malice. A blinding wave of intense anger washed over me, replacing years of silent, fearful submission. I dropped the wet, ruined jacket onto the floor, stepped forward, and slapped her hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the quiet house. Brittany shrieked, clutching her red cheek, her eyes wide with total shock. She stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the thick bedroom rug. Tears of genuine surprise filled her eyes because I had never once retaliated against her relentless bullying before tonight. "You are crazy!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You just ruined everything." I stood my ground, my breathing heavy and my fists clenched tightly at my sides, refusing to back down or apologize for defending myself. Heavy, fast footsteps thundered down the long hallway outside my room, bringing our parents running toward the chaotic commotion. This single violent moment shattered the fragile peace I had maintained for so long. I knew deep down that my life in this toxic household was officially over. The consequences of this slap would alter my entire future. My parents burst through the door, screaming my name. Richard and Patricia stormed into the bedroom, their faces flushed with rage. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall, shaking the framed family portraits that lined the hallway outside. Those portraits prominently featured Brittany graduating high school and attending her debutante ball, with my achievements entirely absent. My father did not look at the toxic orange puddle of bleach soaking into the floorboards. He did not look at my ruined blazer, the only professional garment I owned, now dissolving into a chemical mess. He only looked at his golden child, who was pressing her manicured hands against her cheek, squeezing out bright theatrical tears. Before I could open my mouth to explain that she had deliberately destroyed my property, my father crossed the room in 2 massive strides. He raised his hand and struck me across the face. The force of his palm snapping against my cheekbone sent me stumbling backward. My hip crashed into the corner of my wooden desk, sending a jolt of sharp pain down my leg. I tasted copper as my teeth bit into the inside of my cheek. The stinging heat on my skin completely overrode the chemical burn on my fingers. I stood there breathless, staring at the man who was supposed to protect me. "Are you out of your mind?" Richard roared, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. "You are going to physically assault your sister over a cheap piece of rag." "It is not a cheap rag," I fired back, my voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and raw adrenaline. "It belonged to Grandmother Josephine. It was my only suit for the medical board interview tomorrow morning. She ruined it on purpose because you are bribing the admissions office for her." My father stepped closer, his shadow looming over me. He jabbed a thick finger into my shoulder, forcing me to take another step back. "I do not want to hear another word about this pathetic medical fantasy of yours," he sneered. "You would not be begging for clothes if you had simply accepted the accounting job at my firm. I offered you a guaranteed salary, a stable desk, and a place in the family business. Instead, you chose to play doctor, working graveyard shifts at a diner like a common laborer, embarrassing our family name." I looked past his furious expression and saw my mother, Patricia, kneeling beside Brittany. Patricia was gently stroking the hair of Brittany, cooing soft words of comfort to the girl who had just committed an act of blatant sabotage. "She is bleeding, Mom," Brittany whimpered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I just came in to wish her luck and she attacked me like an animal." Patricia shot me a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are hysterical, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You have always been completely selfish. Your sister is under an immense amount of stress with her own pre-medical applications, and you decide to throw a violent tantrum because you are jealous of her opportunities." Jealous. I repeated the sheer absurdity of the accusation, making my chest tight. "Mom, she failed biology twice. She does not even want to be a doctor. You and Dad are buying her a seat that I have spent the last 4 years earning through sleepless nights and student loans." She poured industrial bleach on my clothes to stop me from going to the interview. "Stop lying," my mother snapped, standing up and crossing her arms. "You have always been jealous of Brittany and her natural grace and social standing. You isolate yourself, you refuse to participate in family events, and now you resort to violence just to ruin the peace in this house. You need serious psychiatric help, Clara. My father nodded in agreement, pointing toward the door. You will apologize to your sister right now. You will apologize for hitting her, and you will apologize for this absurd delusion that you are somehow inherently superior to her. Then, you will march downstairs, call the dean of admissions, and cancel your interview tomorrow morning. You are clearly not mentally fit to represent the Mitchell family in the medical field. I looked at the three of them. My father standing tall and righteous in his expensive tailored suit. My mother perfectly coiffed and utterly blind to reality, protecting the daughter who reflected her own vanity. And Brittany peeking out from behind my mother with a triumphant smirk, flashing briefly across her tear-stained face. In that exact moment, the final thread tying me to this toxic family snapped permanently. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt entirely liberated. I am not apologizing, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy whisper that made my father pause. And I am not canceling my interview. I walked to my closet and pulled down my suitcase. I threw it onto the bed. I did not pack much, just some plain shirts, my textbooks, and the heavy stack of medical school application files I had spent years perfecting. What do you think you are doing? Patricia demanded, her voice rising in pitch as she watched me empty my drawers. If you walk out that door, Clara, do not expect a single dime from us. We will cut off your phone, your car insurance, everything. You will have absolutely nothing. I already have nothing from you, I replied. I pay for my own phone and my own rent. The only reason I am here tonight is because my apartment flooded. I zipped the suitcase shut. I turned to the floor where the ruined blazer lay. The embroidered letters JM on the collar were miraculously untouched by the bleach. I picked it up, clutching the damp fabric to my chest. Leave that garbage here, Richard barked, stepping into my path. Move, I said. The absolute emptiness in my stare unnerved him, and he slowly stepped aside, letting me pass by without saying another single word. The freezing wind whipped as I pushed through the glass doors of the Commonwealth Medical Institute. I had spent the night sitting in a diner clutching my suitcase. I had nowhere else to go. Walking into the grand marble lobby of the prestigious medical school, I stuck out like a sore thumb. The other applicants wore tailored suits and pearl necklaces exuding the confidence of old money. I wore the vintage navy blazer ruined by a massive jagged orange bleach stain. A blonde girl scoffed loudly, wondering why the janitorial staff was checking in at the admissions desk. I kept my chin high and walked straight to the receptionist. I handed over my identification. The woman eyed my ruined jacket with disdain before pointing me toward a row of leather chairs outside the dean's office. Every second ticked by with agonizing slowness. I ran my burned fingertips over the unblemished collar of the jacket, feeling the raised threads of the monogram. It was the only piece of my grandmother I had left. Brittany had tried to destroy it just like she and my parents had tried to destroy my future. I needed to focus. The heavy oak door swung open. The receptionist called my name and gestured for me to enter. I stepped into a massive office lined with framed medical degrees. Behind a sprawling mahogany desk sat Dr. Thorne. He was a formidable man in his 60s with sharp gray eyes and a reputation for breaking unprepared students within seconds. He did not look up immediately. When he finally did, his gaze locked instantly onto my ruined jacket. The silence in the room became heavy. I braced myself for the inevitable reprimand. I opened my mouth, prepared to deliver a rational explanation about a domestic accident and pivot the conversation to my thousands of hours of clinical volunteer work. Before a single word left my lips, Dr. Thorne stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. He ignored my outstretched hand and walked around the massive desk. His sharp gray eyes widened, not at the glaring orange bleach stains, but at the collar of my jacket. He stopped inches away from me. He raised a hand pointing toward the lapel. "Where did you get that jacket?" he asked. "It belonged to my grandmother," I replied, keeping my tone steady. Dr. Thorne kept his eyes glued to the subtle embroidery. J.M., he whispered, reading the letters aloud. Josephine Mitchell. He looked up, meeting my gaze with an intensity that completely caught me off guard. Are you her granddaughter? Are you Josephine Mitchell's granddaughter? Yes, sir, I am, I answered. Dr. Thorne took a deep, shaky breath. He walked back to his desk, but did not sit down. He leaned heavily against the mahogany surface, staring at me as if he were seeing a ghost. Your grandmother was an absolute titan, he said, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years ago, I was a young researcher with a radical idea for neurological mapping. Every hospital board laughed me out. Josephine was the only one who listened. She championed my first major research grant. I owe my entire medical career to that brilliant woman. I stood frozen. My parents had never spoken about my grandmother this way. To Richard and Patricia, Josephine was just an eccentric old woman who wasted her time in laboratories. Hearing the Dean of Medicine speak of her with such profound reverence filled me with pride. But then Dr. Thorne frowned. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by utter confusion and deep concern. He looked me up and down, taking in my exhausted face, my burned fingertips, and the garish bleach stains. If you are Josephine's granddaughter, why are you standing in my office wearing a ruined jacket? He asked. Why do you look like you slept on the street? I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to cry. My family does not support my decision to pursue medicine, I explained, keeping my voice remarkably level. I pay for my own education through diner shifts and tutoring. Last night, my sister destroyed this jacket to sabotage my interview, and my father threw me out of their house. I have absolutely no financial support, Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne looked at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. He shook his head slowly, his brow furrowing in deep disbelief. What do you mean you have no financial support? He demanded, crossing his arms. That makes absolutely no sense, Clara. I am not lying, sir, I said defensively. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his expression hardening into something dangerous and sharp. I am not accusing you of lying, Clara. I am asking how it is mathematically possible. I was on the board of trustees when your grandmother passed away. I know exactly what she left behind. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, serious pitch. What happened to the $10 million trust fund and the medical patent portfolio she legally transferred into your name when you turned 21? The air in the grand office simply vanished. My lungs stopped working. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the distant hum of the city traffic. I stared at the dean, unable to comprehend the words he had just spoken. A $10 million trust fund, a medical patent portfolio. I had never seen a single legal document. I had never received a bank statement. I had spent 2 years scrubbing grease off diner tables while my parents bought Brittany cars. A horrifying realization slammed into me with the force of a freight train. Richard and Patricia had not just hated my medical ambitions. They had not just favored Brittany out of simple parental bias. They had orchestrated a massive and totally calculated financial crime. My parents had forged my signature. They had stolen my entire inheritance right out from under me forever. I walked out into the freezing Boston night, clutching my suitcase in one hand and the damp bleach-stained blazer in the other. I spent the night sitting in a 24-hour diner, staring at the sickly orange patches eating away at the navy wool. I had no other professional clothes. I had no money to buy a new suit. I had nothing but a ruined jacket and an interview that would determine the rest of my life. I walked into the grand marble lobby of the Commonwealth Medical Institute at 8 the next morning. The receptionist eyed my jacket with blatant disgust, but my name was on the list. She pointed me toward the heavy oak doors of the Dean of Medicine. I pushed them open and stepped inside. He was a formidable man with sharp gray eyes and a posture that commanded absolute authority. Dr. Thorne did not look up from my file immediately. When he finally raised his head, his gaze locked onto the glaring orange stains ruining my jacket. I opened my mouth, preparing to deliver a rehearsed explanation about a laundry accident, but the words died in my throat. Dr. Thorne stood up so fast his heavy leather chair slammed against the wall behind him. He walked around the massive mahogany desk, his hands visibly trembling. He did not look at the bleach stains. His eyes were fixed entirely on the collar. He stopped inches away from me and raised a hand pointing at the delicate embroidery. "J.M.," he whispered, his voice cracking with sudden intense emotion. "Josephine Mitchell." He looked up, meeting my gaze with an intensity that paralyzed me. "Are you her granddaughter?" "Yes, sir, I am," I replied. Dr. Thorne leaned against his desk, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Your grandmother was a titan," he said. 30 years ago, I was a young researcher with a radical idea for neurological mapping. Every hospital board laughed me out of their offices. Josephine was the only one who listened. She championed my first major grant. I owe my entire medical career to that brilliant woman. He paused, his brow furrowing as he looked me up and down. "But if you are Josephine Mitchell's granddaughter, why are you standing in my office wearing a ruined jacket? Why does your application show you working graveyard shifts at a diner to pay for community college credits?" "My family does not support my medical ambitions," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "Last night, my sister destroyed this jacket to sabotage my interview, and my father threw me out. I have absolutely no financial support." Dr. Thorne stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. "That makes absolutely no sense, Clara," he demanded, crossing his arms. "I was on the board of trustees when your grandmother passed away. I know exactly what she left behind." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, serious pitch. "What happened to the $10 million trust fund and the medical patent portfolio your grandmother left in your name when you turned 21? The air in the room vanished. My lungs stopped working. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the distant city traffic. A $10 million trust fund, a medical patent portfolio. I had never seen a single legal document. I had spent years scrubbing grease off diner tables while my parents bought Brittany brand new cars and designer wardrobes. A horrifying realization slammed into me with the force of a freight train. Richard and Patricia had not just favored Brittany out of simple parental bias. They had orchestrated a massive, calculated financial crime. They had forged my signature. They had stolen my entire inheritance right out from under me to fund their lavish lifestyle and Brittany's endless failures. I did not break down in tears. I did not scream. Confrontation without power is just noise, and I had no power yet. I looked Dr. Thorne directly in the eye and asked him to help me secure my medical school admission based on my own merit. I promised him I would handle the rest. Fast forward 10 years. I am 33 years old now, and I am a board-certified neurosurgeon. Beyond the operating room, I quietly sit on the board of directors for the largest medical network in Massachusetts. I did not just build a career over the last decade. I built a war chest. I spent 10 years secretly tracking down every single medical patent my parents had illegally liquidated. Working with specialized financial investigators, I legally reacquired my grandmother's entire portfolio through blind trusts and anonymous shell companies. My parents thought I was just a humble hospital employee drowning in medical debt. They had no idea I held the reins to a multi-million-dollar healthcare empire operating under the name J.M. Investment Group. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the past finally caught up to my present. I was in my private hospital office reviewing surgical scans when my secretary knocked on the glass door. A man was waiting outside holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. He stepped into my office and I immediately recognized him from the Financial Society pages. Andre was 34 years old, a brilliant African-American financial analyst known for his ruthless efficiency in corporate mergers. He was also my sister Brittany's husband. Andre had married into the family 3 years ago, completely unaware of their toxic history or the criminal foundation of their wealth. "Clara," he said, extending his hand with a warm, genuine smile. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I am Andre. Brittany has told me so much about you." I shook his hand, maintaining a polite professional facade. "I am sure she has," I replied, noting the expensive tailoring of his suit. "What brings you to my hospital, Andre?" He handed me the heavy velvet-lined envelope. "Brittany is opening a new medical wellness spa downtown," he explained, his eyes scanning my office with quiet appreciation. "She wants you to be there for the grand opening. More importantly, she really wants you at the pre-opening family dinner this Friday. She says it is time to bury the hatchet and reconnect. I looked down at the gold-embossed invitation. Brittany opening a medical spa was a terrifying concept. I knew for a fact she had never passed her medical board exams. The entire business had to be a fraudulent front built on the remaining funds they had stolen from me. They were not inviting me to reconnect. They wanted something. They always wanted something. I slid the velvet envelope across my mahogany desk and looked back up at my charming, unsuspecting brother-in-law. I knew this dinner was a trap designed to exploit me one more time. But I was no longer the helpless 23-year-old girl wearing a bleach-stained blazer. I would not miss it for the world, I told him, allowing a sharp, calculated smile to touch my lips. The heavy glass doors of LeBlanc glided open, revealing a dining room dripping in crystal chandeliers and velvet upholstery. It was the most notoriously overpriced French restaurant in the city. I arrived straight from a grueling 12-hour surgical rotation. I wore dark tailored hospital scrubs under a classic beige trench coat. I did not have time to change into a cocktail dress, nor did I care to perform for them. I handed my coat to the hostess and walked toward the private alcove. Andre stood up immediately, pulling out a chair with a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you for coming, Clara," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder. Brittany remained seated across the table. She wore a diamond necklace that caught the light and a smug expression that had not changed in 10 years. Next to her, Richard and Patricia looked me up and down with identical expressions of extreme distaste. "I see you still refuse to make an effort," Patricia sighed, picking up her crystal champagne flute. "You walk into a 5-star establishment dressed like a common ward nurse. Could you not borrow a dress from a friend?" I unfolded my linen napkin and placed it on my lap, ignoring the jab. "I am a neurosurgeon, Mother," I said calmly. "My attire is functional. It saves lives." Patricia rolled her eyes, leaning closer to Brittany. "Functional is another word for lacking ambition," she whispered loudly enough for the table to hear. "Look at your sister Clara. Brittany is opening a massive medical wellness spa. She is an entrepreneur, a visionary. You are just punching a clock for a hospital paycheck." Richard nodded in agreement, cutting into his steak with precise, aggressive motions. "It is a shame you never had the business acumen to run your own practice," he added. "You always lacked the drive required for true wealth. You settle for a basic salary while your sister builds an empire." Andre shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to diffuse the rising tension. "Clara saves lives every day, Richard," he interjected politely. "That is an incredible achievement. We should be celebrating both of them tonight." Brittany scoffed, swirling her wine. "Saving lives is great, Andre, but building a legacy is better. My spa is going to revolutionize local healthcare." The dinner dragged on in this exact manner. Course after course of delicate French cuisine was served while my parents and sister paraded their supposed superiority. They boasted about the expensive Italian marble imported for the spa lobby, the state-of-the-art lasers they had purchased, and the exclusive clientele they were targeting. I ate my sea bass in silence, absorbing every detail of their fraudulent operation. They were burning through millions of dollars. I knew exactly where those millions had come from, because I had spent a decade tracing the theft of my grandmother's patent portfolio. They were funding this vanity project with the last remaining drops of my stolen inheritance. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared away. The waiter approached the table carrying a sleek black leather folder. He set it discreetly in the center of the table. Richard did not reach for it. Brittany looked away, inspecting her manicured nails. Patricia smiled a sharp, predatory smile. She reached out with one manicured finger and slid the leather folder across the white tablecloth, stopping it next to my water glass. The total glowed on the receipt. $4,000. "Since you are just a single wage earner with no family to feed, you can cover this," Patricia said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "Consider it a donation to your sister's upcoming empire. You certainly have not contributed anything else to this family in the last 10 years. Andre gasped softly, his financial analyst brain processing the sheer audacity of asking a hospital employee to cover a $4,000 dinner unprompted. "Patricia, You cannot ask her to pay for our celebration, he protested, reaching for his own wallet. Brittany slapped her hand over his, stopping him. No, Andre let her do it. She owes us for walking out on this family. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I did not show a single ounce of the burning rage that had fueled my entire adult life. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I retrieved a solid titanium black card. I dropped the exclusive Centurion card onto the leather folder. The metal hit the table with a dull, heavy thud that commanded immediate attention. Andre froze his eyes, darting to the card. As a top-tier financial analyst, he knew exactly what that card represented. He knew the invite-only requirements, the astronomical spending limits, and the massive hidden wealth required to possess one. He looked from the card up to my face, his expression shifting into complete shock. Richard also stopped moving. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits as he stared at the heavy black titanium. The stark contrast between my humble hospital scrubs and the ultimate symbol of limitless financial power paralyzed the entire table. "How did you get that?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I smiled, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. "I already told you, Dad." "I just punch a clock," I said softly. The waiter stepped forward, scooping up the leather folder and my black card. "Right away, madam," he murmured, bowing before disappearing toward the kitchen. The air in the private alcove grew dense. The power dynamic had shifted, and my father could feel it slipping through his fingers. He despised losing control. Just as the waiter walked away, Richard reached down beside his chair. He unclasped his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound stack of legal documents. He slammed the heavy contract onto the table right next to my empty dessert plate. The sound echoed sharply against the quiet of the restaurant. "Now that dinner is settled, sign this," he ordered. The heavy thump of the bound contract against the white tablecloth echoed in the alcove. Richard tapped a gold pen against the top page, his eyes completely devoid of warmth. I looked down at the bold heading printed across the document. It designated me as the honorary medical director of the Mitchell Wellness Spa. I stared at the paper, keeping my expression neutral while my mind raced. The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking. They wanted my board certifications, my impeccable surgical reputation, and my DEA prescribing number to legally legitimize a business my sister was unqualified to run. "You will report to the spa 2 weekends a month," Richard stated, his tone dictating an order. "Your name will be on the door, and your medical license will be framed in the lobby. You will review patient charts, approve treatment protocols for the aesthetic lasers, and sign off on all medical inventory. You will do this entirely free of charge. Consider it your long overdue contribution to the family legacy. You have hoarded your skills for strangers long enough, Clara. It is time you brought your talents back home." I flipped open the first page of the contract, running my finger down the dense legal jargon. "You want me to assume all medical liability for a spa run by someone who failed basic biology?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "If a patient is burned by an improperly calibrated laser or suffers an allergic reaction to an unregulated chemical peel, my medical license takes the hit. I lose my career while Brittany pockets the profits." Patricia slammed her champagne flute down. "Stop being so dramatic, Clara," she hissed. "Nobody is going to get burned. Brittany hired the best estheticians in the city. She simply needs a licensed physician on paper to satisfy the state health department regulations. It is a minor administrative formality. You just stamp your name on a few forms and go back to your hospital job. It requires zero effort from you." Brittany pouted, pushing her lower lip out in a practiced display of victimhood. She grabbed Andre by the arm, pulling him closer to her side. "It is the least you can do!" "Clara," she whined loudly, drawing the attention of a nearby waiter. "Mom and Dad had to mortgage their house just to get my business off the ground. You owe us. We put a roof over your head for 2 decades. I ignored my sister and continued flipping through the heavy pages of the contract. The deeper I went, the more absurd the clauses became. a non-compete agreement preventing me from opening any private practice within a 50-mile radius, a non-disclosure agreement carrying a $1 million penalty. And then hidden near the very back, sandwiched between liability waivers and arbitration clauses, I found exactly what I was looking for. Page 42 was a quitclaim deed. It was completely unrelated to the medical spa. The legal language was dense, designed to confuse a casual reader, but I was not a casual reader. The clause demanded that I sign over all my rights and interest in an abandoned downtown commercial building. It was a dilapidated warehouse located in the city center. It was the last remaining asset from my grandmother Josephine that my parents had not been able to illegally liquidate 10 years ago because the title was locked in a secondary trust. My father was staring at me, his jaw clenched tight. He was waiting for me to blindly sign the back page, just like I used to blindly obey his commands when I was a terrified teenager. They thought I was still that same broken girl. They believed they could distract me with the outrage of the free medical director demand, so I would miss the real estate theft buried at the end of the document. The downtown warehouse district was currently undergoing a massive urban revitalization project. That abandoned building was now worth upwards of $8 million to commercial developers. "You are asking for quite a lot of administrative control," I noted, tapping the edge of the page. "I see you also included a property transfer clause at the back. I assume that is another minor administrative formality." Richard did not miss a beat. "That old warehouse is an absolute liability," he lied smoothly. "The city is threatening to condemn the structure, and the property taxes are bleeding the family accounts dry. We are doing you a massive favor by taking it off your hands and bundling it into the corporate LLC. You do not have the financial liquidity to handle a commercial teardown, Clara. Just sign the document so we can finalize the spa launch and move forward as a united family." He pushed the gold pen across the tablecloth until it touched my plate. The metallic scrape against the porcelain was the only sound in the alcove. Brittany glared at me, tapping her manicured nails impatiently. Patricia crossed her arms, a satisfied smirk returning to her face. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully cornered me into surrendering the last piece of my inheritance, while simultaneously chaining my career to their fraudulent sinking ship. I slowly picked up the heavy gold pen and rolled it between my fingers. I looked down at the signature line on the final page. I hovered the nib of the pen a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. I could feel Richard holding his breath in greedy anticipation. But before the ink could even touch the page, a sudden movement broke the tension. Andre stood up from the table. His chair scraped against the floor. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed financial dossier. He dropped it directly on top of the quitclaim deed blocking my pen. "Hold on right there," Andre said, his deep voice cutting through the restaurant silence like a very sharp knife. Andre pushed his glasses up and stared at my father. He kept his hand planted firmly on top of the financial dossier he had dropped over the quitclaim deed. Richard glared at his son-in-law, his face turning an angry mottled red. "What do you think you are doing, Andre?" My father snapped, his voice vibrating with rage. "Remove those papers from the table right now. Clara needs to sign this agreement." Andre did not flinch. He slowly opened his dossier, revealing spreadsheets and property records highlighted in bright yellow ink. "Richard, why does this quitclaim deed list the property owner as JM Investment Group?" Andre asked, his voice deadpan. "You told me you owned that downtown building free and clear. You swore the title was fully under your name when I underwrote the $3 million business loan for Brittany's spa." My father's rigid posture faltered. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant patriarch vanished, replaced by a panicked man caught in a massive lie. "That is just outdated administrative jargon," Richard sputtered, waving his hand dismissively. "The holding company is a defunct entity. The property belongs to our family trust. It is a minor bureaucratic hurdle we need Clara to clear." Andre flipped to another page, his analytical mind refusing to let the glaring inconsistency slide. "It is not a defunct entity, Richard. JM Investment Group is an active holding company that has been acquiring premium commercial real estate across the coast for 10 years. If you do not legally own the building, you committed federal bank fraud by using it as collateral for the loan. You used my credentials to secure a fraudulent $3 million. Richard slammed his fist against the table, rattling the crystal champagne flutes. I told you to mind your own business, Andre. He roared, his face turning purple. You are a financial analyst, not a real estate lawyer. Stop reading the fine print and let me handle my own family affairs. Your job was to secure the funding for your wife, not to interrogate me. Clara, pick up the pen and sign the paper right now. Patricia quickly jumped in, trying to soothe the escalating disaster. Andre, darling, you are overthinking this, she cooed, reaching out to touch his arm. Richard knows exactly what he is doing. We are just consolidating our assets to build Brittany a beautiful future. Why do you insist on creating problems where none exist? Clara, just scribble your name. Brittany crossed her arms, pouting like a spoiled child denied a toy. Seriously, Andre, you are ruining our dinner, she whined, kicking him under the table. It is the least you can do, Clara. Mom and Dad had to mortgage their house just to get my business off the ground. You owe us. You are supposed to be on my side, Andre. Tell Clara to sign the paper. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the glorious implosion unfolding before me. I watched Andre's sharp, analytical brain process the sheer magnitude of the deception. He looked at the heavy gold pen resting near my plate. Then he looked at my solid titanium black Centurion card still sitting on the waiter's silver tray. He looked at my cheap hospital scrubs and then back to the name of the holding company printed on the quitclaim deed. J.M. Investment Group. I locked eyes with my brother-in-law. I watched the exact second the realization dawned on his face. He saw the truth. He realized that the family he married into was entirely bankrupt. He realized that his father-in-law had committed federal fraud, dragging him into the crosshairs of a massive legal catastrophe. Looking at my calm, unwavering stare, he realized that I was not the pathetic, estranged sister they had always claimed I was. I was the architect of their destruction. The silence in the alcove was absolute. Even Brittany stopped whining as she felt the heavy, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Richard breathed heavily, his chest heaving as he glared at me, waiting for me to submit to his authority one last time. He genuinely believed that his aggressive shouting would force me to bend. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen. Richard exhaled a sharp breath of victory, and Patricia smiled, her predatory smirk returning. I hovered the nib a fraction of an inch above the signature line. Then I casually opened my hand and dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the porcelain plate, rolling off the edge and dropping onto the floor. My father's victorious smile instantly vanished. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. Andre is right, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like ice. You cannot claim property owned by J.M. Investment Group. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and locked eyes with my father. Especially since I am its sole CEO. Richard's jaw dropped open. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. Patricia let out a strangled, choking sound, pressing her hand against her chest as her perfectly constructed reality shattered into a million jagged pieces. Brittany stared at me, blinking in absolute confusion, unable to comprehend the words I had just spoken. I did not give them a single second to respond. I stood up smoothly, pushing my chair back from the table. I grabbed my beige trench coat from the back of the chair and slipped it on over my hospital scrubs. I looked down at the three people who had stolen my inheritance, ruined my grandmother's legacy, and tried to destroy my future. They were powerless. Thank you for the dinner invitation, I said, buttoning my coat with calm, deliberate movements. I will see you all at the grand opening on Friday. I turned my back on my stunned family and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to choke on their own ruins. Friday evening arrived with the crisp chill typical of a Boston autumn. The grand opening of the Mitchell Wellness Spa was a spectacle of borrowed wealth. Valets in crisp uniforms sprinted down the circular driveway of the newly leased commercial property, parking a steady stream of imported luxury vehicles. Floodlights illuminated the imported Italian marble facade while a string quartet played softly near the entrance. I stepped out of my hired town car and the ambient chatter of Boston's elite immediately paused. Heads turned. Champagne flutes hovered halfway to perfectly painted lips. I had not chosen a standard cocktail dress for this occasion. I wore a breathtaking floor-length emerald silk gown tailored perfectly to my silhouette. Draped over my shoulders, resting against the expensive emerald silk, was the navy wool blazer from 10 years ago. The bleach stains were still there, glaring sickly orange patches eating away at the fabric. I had not touched them or tried to dye them. Instead, I had taken the jacket to a master tailor, having the ruined wool reshaped and structured with sharp, imposing shoulders. I wore the physical evidence of my sister's sabotage like a suit of armor. It was a monument to the night they tried to destroy my future, and the exact moment my ascent truly began. Murmurs rippled through the crowded lobby as I walked past the velvet ropes. Investors, local politicians, and minor celebrities leaned in to whisper to one another, their eyes darting from my diamond earrings to the destroyed wool resting on my shoulders. I felt the heat of their stares, but my posture remained absolute. I glided across the polished marble floor, absorbing the opulent details of the fraudulent empire my family had built using stolen funds and falsified collateral. The towering glass displays of unregulated skin serums, the imported crystal chandeliers, and the gold leaf detailing on the walls were all paid for with the inheritance they thought I would never uncover. "Clara, what in God's name are you doing?" Patricia materialized from the crowd, blocking my path. Her face was flushed a deep mottled red under her heavy evening makeup. She wore a silver sequined gown that looked stiff and uncomfortable. She grabbed my arm, her manicured fingers digging into the ruined sleeve of my blazer. "Take that disgusting rag off right now," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Are you trying to humiliate us in front of the entire city? The mayor is standing 30 feet away. You look like a homeless vagrant who broke into a gala. Take it off before the photographers see you." I looked down at her hand, gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she slowly, self-consciously let go. "This jacket is a piece of family history, Mother," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I thought it was only appropriate to wear it tonight. It reminds me of the lengths this family will go to in order to ensure Brittany succeeds. It is the foundation of her entire career." Patricia's eyes widened with genuine panic. She glanced around nervously, terrified that the nearby investors might overhear my implications. "You are insane," she whispered, stepping closer to block me from the view of a passing photographer. "We invited you here as an olive branch. We gave you a chance to be part of something spectacular, and you show up dressed in garbage just to spite your sister. You always have to make everything about your petty little grievances." I smiled, a cold, calculated expression that did not reach my eyes. I sidestepped Patricia effortlessly, gliding past her trembling frame. "I am not here to make a scene, Mother," I said over my shoulder. "I am here to watch the show." I walked toward the center of the grand lobby, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. I scanned the room looking for Andre. I spotted him standing near the back exit. He was not mingling. He was not drinking. He held his phone tightly to his ear, his face drawn and pale. The financial dossier from the restaurant was tucked firmly under his arm. He caught my eye across the crowded room and gave a barely imperceptible nod. He had spent the last 3 days verifying everything I had exposed at the restaurant. He now knew the spa was built on federal bank fraud. He knew his wife had lied to him. The detonation was already primed. I just had to wait for the timer to reach 0. The ambient music suddenly faded out, replaced by the sharp feedback of a microphone tapping. The crowd shifted, turning their attention toward the raised dais at the front of the room. Brittany stepped up to the podium. She wore a blindingly white designer gown that clung tightly to her frame, her hair styled in perfect cascading waves. She gripped the microphone with both hands, soaking in the applause of the investors and socialites. She looked out over the sea of wealthy faces, her gaze scanning the crowd until it locked directly onto me. The triumphant smile on her face twisted into something sharp and deeply malicious. She raised the microphone to her lips, her eyes burning with pure venom. "Welcome everyone to the dawn of a new era in luxury healthcare," she announced, her voice echoing through the massive marble lobby. "Tonight, we are not just opening a spa. We are setting a new standard for medical wellness. But before we cut the ribbon, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the people who made this possible. My wonderful parents who sacrificed everything to support my vision. And of course my sister Clara, who is here tonight to officially join our executive team. Please give my sister a warm round of applause as she comes up to the stage to sign the final documents right here in front of our esteemed guests." The polite applause rolled through the expansive marble lobby, a soft smattering of sound from the gathered investors and wealthy socialites who expected a standard ribbon-cutting ceremony. I stood perfectly still near the center of the spacious room, the brilliant emerald silk of my designer gown pooling elegantly around my feet. Brittany kept the microphone pressed closely to her mouth, her eyes glittering with a dark manic energy. She had just invited me to the stage to sign the final documents. I took one deliberate step forward, the sharp click of my heel echoing against the polished floor. Brittany immediately threw her head back and let out a sharp, ringing laugh that echoed harshly through the high ceilings. The sound was so jarring that the scattered applause instantly died out. "Oh, please," she mocked, waving her free hand at me as if swatting away a fly. "I am entirely joking. Can you imagine my sister on an executive board?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger past me toward the absolute darkest corner of the vast venue near the swinging doors of the busy catering kitchen. "Clara, we actually reserved a special spot just for you, right back there with the janitorial staff. It is table 14. Do not worry, I made sure they set a plate for you before their shift starts. You can feel right at home." A heavy, highly uncomfortable silence descended upon the grand lobby. Boston elite did not mind quiet ruthlessness in the corporate boardroom, but this display of raw, unprovoked familial cruelty was entirely distasteful. A few awkward chuckles drifted from the front row, mostly from his sycophantic business associates attempting to appease him. Patricia simply took a slow sip of her vintage champagne, looking thoroughly pleased with the public degradation. She subtly adjusted her sequined dress, basking in the glow of my intended humiliation. Brittany gripped the microphone tighter, leaning over the clear acrylic podium. "I really do want to thank my sister, a standard hospital employee," she announced, her voice laced with pure, concentrated venom. "She taught me that if you lack ambition, you will forever remain a servant to the system. She is the perfect example of what happens when you have absolutely no drive, no vision, and no family legacy." I look at her and I am reminded every single day of why I had to build this massive empire. Let us raise a glass to the humble workers of the world who keep the lights on for the rest of us. The awkward laughter sputtered out completely, leaving a tense, chilling void in the room. Several wealthy investors exchanged highly alarmed glances, discreetly setting their champagne flutes down on passing silver trays. The air grew thick with secondhand embarrassment. Standing just to the side of the raised podium, Andre remained entirely frozen. The rich color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. He stared openly at his wife as if he was seeing a terrifying stranger. His profound horror was not solely about the blatant public cruelty he was currently witnessing toward me. His brilliant financial mind was rapidly calculating the devastating cascade of massive red flags he had actively uncovered all week. He looked down at the thick financial dossier tucked tightly under his arm. He had spent 3 agonizing sleepless nights verifying the true ownership of the downtown warehouse, confirming that JM Investment Group was a multi-million-dollar healthcare powerhouse, and tracing the undeniable federal bank fraud his father-in-law had committed to secure the spa loan. Looking at her twisted, malicious smile, Andre realized in real horrifying time that his wife was not a visionary entrepreneur. She was a malicious, deeply insecure, completely unhinged fraud. The entire family legacy was a toxic sham built entirely on deliberate lies, criminal theft, and pathological extreme jealousy. They had stolen from their own flesh and blood to fund a desperate, pathetic illusion of grandeur. He gripped the heavy dossier, feeling the terrible weight of the evidence inside. He took a slow, deliberate step away from the podium, intentionally distancing himself from the impending blast radius. He knew a reckoning was coming. My father stood near the front row, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his rigid posture radiating arrogant satisfaction. He nodded approvingly at Brittany, completely blind to the financial executioner standing just a few feet away. Richard believed this public flogging would finally break my spirit, forcing me to sign the quitclaim deed in a desperate bid to regain their conditional approval. He expected me to lower my head, tuck my tail between my legs, and scurry away to the janitorial table, just like the obedient scapegoat I used to be. I did not move a single inch toward the back of the spacious room. I did not shrink away into the dark shadows. I stood firm in the center of the glittering lobby, the heavy customized wool of my bleach-stained blazer resting upon my shoulders like the legendary mantle of a conquering ancient general. The orange stains seemed to glow under the brilliant crystal chandeliers, a vivid reminder of the exact moment I stopped seeking their love and started building my war chest. The power dynamic had completely inverted permanently, and they were the only people in the room too arrogant and blind to realize it. I took a deep, slow, calming breath, feeling the luxurious cool silk of my stunning gown brush against my bare legs. I slowly lifted my chin, locking my steady gaze entirely onto her smugly triumphant face. The crowd around me held its collective breath, waiting for my inevitable retreat. Instead of shrinking away in defeat, I slowly stood up straight, squaring my perfectly tailored shoulders. I did not utter a single word in response to her profound insult. I simply began walking directly toward the brightly lit VIP stage, leaving the frantic whispers of the shocked, wealthy crowd far behind me. The distance to the VIP stage felt infinitely long, yet I covered it with the steady pace of an executioner. The Boston socialites parted before me. I kept my eyes locked on Brittany. I watched her smug smile falter, replaced by genuine confusion, as I did not veer toward the back corridor. I was supposed to accept my role as the family failure and fade away. Instead, I ascended the first velvet-carpeted step leading to the main platform. I never made it to the second step. Hard fingers clamped down on my left bicep with bone-bruising force. A second set of hands grabbed my right elbow, manicured nails digging sharply through the wool of my bleach-stained blazer. I did not need to look to know who captured me. My parents moved with frantic speed, completely at odds with their usual elegance. Richard leaned his heavy frame against my side, physically blocking my upward momentum. Patricia flanked my right, her grip trembling with fury. They did not shout or make a scene. They operated with the silent violence of people who spent decades managing the family image. Richard shoved me sideways, forcing my trajectory away from the stage and toward the perimeter of the lobby. "Right this way." "Clara," my father muttered through a fixed smile, nodding politely to a passing city councilman as he forcibly hauled me away. I allowed them to steer me. Resistance would only cause a physical altercation, and I needed them to feel in control for what was about to happen. They marched me toward the east wing, pushing me through a heavy door that opened into a soundproof glass-walled VIP suite. The room was designed for high-stakes negotiations, positioned slightly above the main floor. It offered a panoramic view of the grand opening gala, but the thick acoustic glass ensured not a single syllable spoken inside could be heard by the guests mingling below. It was a fishbowl, placing us in full view of the Boston elite while granting absolute auditory privacy. Andre stood on the floor below, his sharp eyes tracking our every movement. He watched my parents back me into the center of the room. Richard slammed the heavy oak door shut, throwing the brass deadbolt with a resounding click that severed us from the ambient noise. The instant the lock engaged, the polite smiles melted off my parents' faces, replaced by the ugly expressions of cornered predators. Patricia struck first. She slapped her hand against the glass wall, oblivious to the curious glances darting our way from the crowd outside. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with a hysterical edge. "You are actively trying to destroy your sister's moment." We offered you a chance to finally be useful, and you parade around in that hideous jacket like a deranged martyr. You will sign the employment contract right now, or I will have security throw you out. I stood perfectly still, smoothing a slight crease in my blazer. I am not here for a job. Mother, I replied, my voice entirely devoid of the fear she expected. I am here to reclaim what belongs to me. Richard stepped in front of Patricia, his face turning a dangerous mottled purple. He loomed over me using his height to cast a shadow across my face, a classic intimidation tactic that had worked flawlessly when I was a terrified teenager. It had absolutely no effect on me now. You will sign over the JM building, Clara. He growled, his voice a low threat echoing harshly in the soundproof suite. I do not know how you managed to hijack the holding company, and I do not care. You are going to transfer the deed to the family trust tonight. You are going to sign the quitclaim document, and you are going to smile while you do it. I looked up at him, my expression completely blank. You committed federal bank fraud, Richard. You used property you do not own as collateral for a $3 million loan. You manipulated Andre into underwriting it. The authorities will not care about the family trust. They will care about the felony. The muscle in my father's jaw twitched. He leaned closer, his breath hot and ragged. He realized that appeals to family loyalty were useless. He decided to use the only weapon he had left: total destruction. If you do not sign over the JM building tonight, I will call the medical board. Richard threatened, jabbing his thick finger directly at my chest. I will tell them you are stealing hospital supplies. I will ruin your medical license just like I ruined your college fund. I will make sure you never work in healthcare again. You will be a disgraced, unemployed nobody. I took your tuition money to fund your sister's business, and I will take your career tonight. I watched the conviction in his eyes. He fully intended to destroy my life to protect his favorite child. He felt powerful, untouchable, entirely secure behind the thick, soundproof glass, shielding his monstrous confession from the wealthy crowd. The guests outside continued to sip their champagne, completely oblivious to the blackmail occurring right in front of them. My mother crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk spreading across her lips as she waited for me to break down and beg. I did not break. I did not beg. I simply smiled. It was a slow, glacial smile that caused the triumphant sneer to instantly vanish from my mother's face. Richard's aggressive posture faltered, a flicker of profound uncertainty flashing through his angry eyes. He expected tears, but he received absolute terrifying calm. I slowly reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my right ear. My fingers lingered there, lightly tapping the subtle flesh-colored earpiece tucked discreetly inside my ear canal. I maintained unblinking eye contact with the man who had just gleefully confessed to ruining my past. Did you get all of that, Dr. Thorne? Richard recoiled as if physically struck by an invisible force. His raised finger dropped, and the violent flush of anger on his cheeks rapidly drained, leaving him a sickly pale white. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat as her eyes darted from the subtle device in my ear to the heavy oak door. They had spent decades orchestrating their deceptions in private, carefully controlling the narrative and silencing any opposition. The realization that their most venomous threats had just been broadcast to an external authority completely paralyzed them. I did not give them a single second to recover their shattered composure. I stepped forward and shoved my shoulder hard against my father's chest, knocking his heavy frame aside with a surge of adrenaline. He stumbled backward into Patricia, both of them too stunned to retaliate. I reached the heavy oak door, flipped the brass deadbolt, and pushed it open. The ambient noise of the grand opening gala washed over me immediately, the polite chatter and soft string music replacing the suffocating silence of the glass-walled suite. I marched directly toward the raised dais, my emerald silk gown trailing behind me and my ruined bleach-stained blazer sitting heavily on my shoulders. The Boston socialites parted like water, their curious stares tracking my unyielding progression. Andre watched me from the perimeter of the room, his grip tightening on his financial dossier, his analytical mind racing to catch up with my calculated maneuvers. Brittany was still standing at the clear acrylic podium, beaming at the flashing cameras of the hired local press. She was entirely oblivious to the absolute disaster unfolding just a few yards away. As I ascended the carpeted steps to the stage, her triumphant smile faltered. Her bright blue eyes widened in genuine confusion as she watched me bypass the velvet ropes and step directly into her meticulously curated spotlight. "What are you doing?" she hissed through gritted teeth, keeping her voice low enough to avoid the microphone. "Get off my stage before I have security throw you out into the street." I did not respond. I simply reached out and plucked the expensive wireless microphone right out of her perfectly manicured hands. The sudden aggressive movement caused a sharp squeal of feedback to echo through the massive overhead speakers. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of networking and laughter completely evaporated. The entire venue fell dead silent. Hundreds of wealthy investors, local politicians, and socialites turned their collective gaze toward the stage, watching the estranged sister in the ruined jacket commandeer the evening. "My sister is absolutely right," I announced, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the cavernous marble lobby. "I am a wage earner. I am a standard hospital employee." I stood beside Brittany, refusing to let her shrink away from the harsh glare of the floodlights. But she conveniently forgot to mention a few vital details about my humble career. I do not just work in a hospital. I am the senior compliance investigator for the State Medical Board, the very same medical board that governs this facility and issues its operational licenses. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the entire front row of stunned investors. Men in expensive tailored suits suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting their weight and glancing nervously toward the exits. Furthermore, I continued pacing slowly across the stage, ensuring every single person in the room heard my next words perfectly. Brittany also forgot to mention another minor detail about my lack of ambition. I own the exclusive patents to every single piece of advanced medical machinery currently sitting in her treatment rooms. The laser ablation units, the cryogenic sculpting chambers, the dermal regeneration pods, they are all manufactured by a subsidiary of JM Investment Group, the holding company I own and operate. The silence in the room transformed from curious shock into absolute horror. Andre let out a sharp breath, dragging his hand across his face as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The collateral for the $3 million loan was completely fraudulent, and the very equipment inside the building belonged to the person they had just attempted to publicly humiliate and illegally blackmail. My parents burst out of the VIP suite and scrambled toward the edge of the stage, their faces masks of pure terror. Richard opened his mouth to shout, but the sheer magnitude of the public exposure suffocated his words. He was now completely, utterly powerless. "You have been operating this facility without proper medical oversight," I stated, staring directly at the frantic investors who had bankrolled my sister's fraudulent dreams. "You have utilized stolen collateral to secure federal loans. You have imported unlicensed serums that have not passed basic regulatory testing. And you have done it all while attempting to extort the very board investigators sent to audit your compliance," Brittany snapped. The polished, elegant facade shattered completely, replaced by the feral desperation of a spoiled child having her favorite toy ripped away. "You are a liar," she screamed, lunging forward with her hands raised like claws. "Give me back that microphone, you insane, jealous bitch. You are making all of this up just to ruin my life because you are a pathetic nobody." She grabbed my shoulder, her manicured nails digging into the tough wool of my blazer. She yanked hard, trying to physically wrestle the microphone from my grip. I stood my ground, planting my feet firmly against the polished stage. The crowd erupted into chaotic shouts. Security guards stationed near the perimeter hesitated, unsure of whether to intervene against the guest of honor or protect the speaker. Brittany raised her hand, ready to strike my face while shrieking that I was clinically insane. She pulled her arm back, her diamond bracelets catching the harsh overhead light. Before her trembling hand could make contact, The heavy main doors of the grand venue swung open violently, slamming against the marble walls with an explosive crash. I shoved past my stunned parents, leaving them paralyzed inside the glass-walled VIP room. They were completely immobilized by the devastating realization that their vicious extortion attempt had just been recorded and broadcast to federal authorities. I pushed the heavy oak door open and marched directly back into the glittering, opulent lobby. The ambient chatter of the Boston elite hummed around me, entirely oblivious to the criminal reckoning that was rapidly descending upon them. I kept my eyes locked on the brilliantly lit stage, my pace steady, purposeful, and entirely unyielding. Brittany was still standing behind the clear acrylic podium, basking in the glow of the flashing cameras. She wore a sickeningly sweet smile, preparing to deliver the final lines of her fraudulent inaugural speech. As I confidently ascended the velvet-carpeted stairs, her triumphant expression shattered. Her bright blue eyes widened in pure, unfiltered shock. I did not give her a single second to react or call for the hired security. I walked straight up to her and forcefully plucked the expensive wireless microphone right out of her perfectly manicured hands. The sudden aggressive movement caused a sharp squeal of feedback to echo harshly through the massive overhead speakers. The hired string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of elite networking completely evaporated. The expansive room fell dead silent. Hundreds of wealthy investors, local politicians, and influential socialites turned their collective gaze toward the main stage, watching the estranged sister in the ruined bleach-stained blazer completely commandeer the evening. "My sister is right," I announced to the crowd, my voice projecting with lethal clarity, slicing through the heavy, opulent atmosphere she had built. "I am a wage earner." But she conveniently forgot to mention a few vital details about my humble career. I work for the very medical board that governs this facility. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the entire front row of stunned investors. Men in expensive tailored suits suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting their weight and glancing nervously toward the exits. "And I own the patents to every single piece of medical machinery currently sitting in her spa," I added, ensuring every single person in the room heard my words perfectly. Brittany snapped. The polished, elegant facade shattered completely, replaced by the feral desperation of a spoiled child having her favorite toy ripped away. "You are insane!" she screamed, lunging forward with her hands raised like claws. "Give me back that microphone, you jealous, pathetic fraud. You are making all of this up just to ruin my life." She grabbed my shoulder, her nails digging into the tough wool of my blazer. She yanked hard, trying to physically wrestle the microphone from my grip. I stood my ground, planting my feet firmly against the polished stage. The crowd erupted into chaotic shouts. Security guards stationed near the perimeter hesitated, unsure of whether to intervene against the guest of honor or protect the speaker. Brittany raised her hand, ready to strike my face while shrieking that I was clinically insane. Before her trembling hand could make contact, the heavy main doors of the venue swung open violently. Through the shattered threshold walked Dr. Thorne, flanked by state medical inspectors. He was an imposing figure in a tailored charcoal suit, commanding absolute authority. Surrounding him was a squad of 12 inspectors, wearing crisp navy windbreakers, with the official Massachusetts Medical Ethics Board insignia, printed in bold white lettering. Behind them stood 4 uniformed police officers, their hands resting casually on their utility belts. The sheer visual weight of their coordinated entrance instantly suffocated the remaining oxygen in the room. Brittany slowly lowered her hand, her perfectly contoured face draining of all color. She took a stumbling step backward, her white designer gown tangling around her ankles. She looked frantically from Dr. Thorne to the uniformed officers, and then finally back to me. Her manic arrogance fractured, dissolving into raw, primal panic. Dr. Thorne marched down the center aisle, his hard leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished Italian marble. The gathered crowd pressed themselves against the gold-leafed walls, desperate to avoid any association with the impending raid. He stopped at the base of the raised stage and looked up at me, a grim expression setting his jaw. He gave a sharp, definitive nod, confirming that the perimeter was completely secured and my audio feed had successfully recorded every single threat Richard had made in the VIP room. I turned my attention back to the terrified woman trembling before me. I raised the microphone to my lips, my voice projected with absolute authority, sealing her fate. As the director of the Medical Ethics Board, I am officially suspending this facility's operating license. I announce the words ringing out like a judge delivering a final verdict. You are using stolen, uncalibrated medical patents to perform illegal procedures. Every machine in this building is a regulatory hazard and a severe public health risk. This spa is entirely a criminal enterprise funded by federal bank fraud and medical theft. On the stage, I lowered the microphone and watched the absolute destruction of their meticulously crafted reality. Dr. Thorne signaled his team. The state medical inspectors fanned out across the luxurious lobby, moving with swift, practiced efficiency. They marched directly toward the towering glass displays of unregulated skin serums and the imported cryogenic sculpting chambers. They pulled thick rolls of industrial tape from their pockets. The harsh, ripping sound of the adhesive echoed through the silent room as the inspectors began slapping bright red condemnation stickers on the expensive spa equipment. The vibrant red warning labels clashed violently with the gold leaf detailing and crystal chandeliers marking the luxurious medical machines as seized criminal evidence. Brittany stared at the red stickers defacing her pristine machinery. Her breath hitched in her chest. The brutal reality of her total defeat finally crushed her enormously fragile ego. She suddenly dropped down to her knees, wailing in absolute unbridled agony and sheer despair. Brittany's piercing, agonizing wails echoed loudly off the vaulted ceilings, a harsh, jagged sound that completely shattered the fragile remaining illusion of her fake empire. She clawed at the hem of her white designer gown, her perfectly contoured face contorting in an ugly mask of pure, unfiltered devastation. Around her, the state inspectors moved with ruthless efficiency. The sharp, tearing sounds of industrial adhesive tape punctuated her sobs as bright red condemnation stickers were slapped across the sleek, uncalibrated laser units and the imported cryogenic chambers. The luxurious equipment, previously the crown jewels of her fraudulent enterprise, was now visually branded as criminal evidence. The gathered, breathless Boston elite, sensing the catastrophic shift in power, actively backed away from the stage. No one offered to help Brittany. However, the nightmare for my family was only just beginning. The heavy main doors, which had remained propped open by the state medical board inspectors, now admitted a vastly different kind of authority. Two men strode into the grand lobby. They wore immaculately tailored conservative dark suits. They moved with the synchronized predatory grace of apex predators entering a confined space. The heavy gold shields securely clipped to their leather belts caught the blinding glare of the massive crystal chandeliers. These were not local investigators. They were federal attorneys representing the United States Department of Justice. The state inspectors immediately parted, creating a clear, unobstructed path for the federal agents. The sheer gravity of their presence caused the ambient temperature in the massive room to plummet. Richard recognized them instantly. His decades of corporate maneuvering had taught him to identify the exact moment a sinking ship was entirely unsalvageable. The state medical board meant heavy fines, license suspensions, and a ruined public reputation. The federal government meant federal prison. His face, already completely devoid of any natural color, instantly turned a ghastly, sickening shade of pale gray. He did not look at his wailing daughter on the floor. He did not look at his wife, Patricia, who was currently frozen in a state of catatonic shock near the VIP suite. He looked only at the exits. Operating on pure, cowardly instinct, Richard spun around. He ruthlessly abandoned his family without a single second thought. He lowered his head and attempted to casually weave through the panicked crowd, aiming directly for the swinging doors of the busy catering kitchen. He planned to slip out through the loading dock, vanish into the Boston night, and let his wife and daughter face the legal firing squad alone. He barely made it 10 feet. As Richard reached for the brass handle of the kitchen door, two massive figures stepped out from the shadows of the corridor. They were private security contractors specifically hired by Andre for the evening, but operating under strict new directives. They crossed their thick arms, forming an impenetrable human wall of solid muscle and black Kevlar. Richard forcefully slammed into them violently, bouncing off their chests like a fragile bird striking a heavy glass window. He immediately stumbled backward, gasping for air. "You are not going anywhere," Richard Andre stated, stepping out from the crowd and adjusting his cuffs. "The local authorities have completely secured the perimeter, and the federal agents have specifically requested your attendance." Richard spun wildly, completely trapped between the security guards and the advancing federal attorneys. His chest heaved as he frantically searched the room for a non-existent escape route. Up on the stage, Dr. Thorne stepped forward. The commanding presence of the Medical Ethics Board director drew the collective attention of the entire room. He reached out and I handed him the wireless microphone. The quiet hum of the audio feed stabilized, amplifying his deep, resonant voice across the sprawling, silent lobby. 10 years ago, a brilliant student walked into my office wearing a bleached blazer, unaware that her family had stolen $10 million from her. "Tonight, we rectify that," Dr. Thorne announced. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. The wealthy investors who had previously funded Richard's ventures now stared at him with naked disgust. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering. Patricia covered her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, suddenly realizing that the ultimate family secret was finally bleeding out into the public domain for everyone to witness. For a decade, this family has utilized stolen wealth to build a fraudulent empire. Dr. Thorne continued, his gaze locking onto Richard's trembling frame. They diverted her inheritance into a maze of shell companies, eventually funding the JM Investment Group. They used her money to buy power, and they used their power to continuously break her down. They expected her to disappear. They expected her to remain a silent, obedient victim. But they severely underestimated her brilliance. Dr. Thorne turned to look at me, a glimmer of profound pride shining in his stern eyes. "She spent the last 10 years meticulously tracing every single stolen penny, mastering medical compliance law, and securing the patents to the very machinery her family relied upon to build this fraudulent spa. She did not seek petty revenge. Instead, she dedicated her entire adult life to building a completely watertight, utterly irrefutable federal case against them." Dr. Thorne lowered the microphone and gestured toward the center of the room. The crowd seamlessly parted, creating a wide circle around my terrified parents and the two federal attorneys. The agents stepped forward, their polished shoes coming to a halt just inches away from Richard's trembling feet. The federal attorneys stepped into the clearing, placing their sleek leather cases onto a nearby wooden cocktail table. The lobby was so deathly quiet that the synchronized mechanical clicks of the brass latches echoed like twin gunshots. With slow, deliberate movements, they flipped the heavy lids open, reaching deep inside their respective cases. They did not pull out handcuffs or arrest warrants just yet. Instead, focusing on the insurmountable evidence of a decade of fraud, the federal attorneys opened their briefcases, pulling out deeply buried financial records. The taller of the two federal attorneys, a woman with sharp features and a strict no-nonsense demeanor, withdrew a thick stack of manila folders from her leather briefcase. She handed the top file directly to me. I did not bother opening it. I already knew every single forged signature, every falsified bank transfer, and every hidden offshore routing number by heart. I turned my attention toward the glass-enclosed audio-visual control booth suspended above the main lobby floor. I gave the lead technician inside a single sharp nod. Instantly, the massive digital projection screens flanking the stage flickered. They had been displaying Britney's heavily airbrushed promotional videos all evening, looping images of her fake, luxurious lifestyle. The screens suddenly went completely black. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as the ambient lighting dimmed, plunging the room into a dramatic cinematic shadow. Seconds later, a blindingly bright white light illuminated the screens. High-resolution scans of highly classified banking documents materialized, magnified to 50 times their original size for every single investor, socialite, and journalist to scrutinize. At the very top of the projected documents, a name was clearly visible in bold, unmistakable print: the Josephine Heritage Trust. Patricia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. Her legs gave out completely and she collapsed against a cocktail table, sending crystal champagne flutes crashing to the marble floor. The shattering glass provided a fitting soundtrack to the destruction of her carefully curated high society image. Richard stumbled backward, his hands desperately clawing at his collar as if his expensive silk tie was suddenly strangling him. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit that no longer existed. I pointed a steady finger at the massive screens behind me. Two highly distinct signatures were blown up side by side. The one on the left was elegant, flowing, and authentic, belonging to my late grandmother Josephine. The one on the right was a rigid, mechanical imitation hastily scrawled on a transfer authorization form, dated exactly 3 days after her funeral. "You didn't just steal my future," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, unwavering authority through the silent, cavernous room. "You committed federal wire fraud and identity theft to fund Brittany's failed lifestyle." The federal attorney stepped forward, her voice cutting through the heavy air with surgical precision. She addressed the crowd, holding up the matching physical documents. For the past 10 years, Richard and Patricia forged the signature of a deceased woman to systematically drain $10 million from a legally binding trust, intended solely for Clara, the agent announced. They routed these stolen funds through a complex web of anonymous shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. They deliberately laundered this money back into the United States to purchase the real estate, the inventory, and the commercial operating licenses for this very facility. The room erupted into chaotic whispers. The wealthy investors who had poured their own capital into Brittany's spa realized in real time that their money was tied up in a massive, federally investigated money laundering operation. They were legally compromised. Several men began frantically dialing their own attorneys, power-walking toward the exits. "You thought you were so incredibly clever," I continued, stepping off the edge of the stage and slowly walking toward my parents. "You assumed that because I was young, grieving, and completely dependent on you, I would simply accept your lie that the trust had been lost to bad market investments. You spent a decade mocking my cheap clothes, criticizing my modest apartment, and treating me like a pathetic burden. You threw table scraps at me while silently gorging yourselves on my legal inheritance." Richard raised his hands in a desperate, trembling gesture of surrender. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, whimpering sob. "We are your family. We can fix this quietly. We can absolutely transfer the building deeds to you tomorrow morning. We can give you equity. Just call them off. Please do not send your own mother and father to a federal penitentiary." "There is no equity left to give," Richard Andre stated, his voice slicing through the panic like a blade. Andre stepped out from the shadows of the VIP corridor, his face completely devoid of any sympathy. He held his thick financial dossier tightly against his chest. He looked at his father-in-law with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I spent the last 72 hours auditing the primary accounts," Andre announced, addressing the federal agents directly. "The JM Investment Group holding company is completely insolvent. Richard used the stolen trust funds to prop up Brittany's previous 5 failed business ventures, burning through the cash to cover massive operational losses. When the stolen money finally ran out last month, he leveraged the stolen medical patents to secure a fraudulent commercial loan from my bank. They have absolutely zero capital remaining in any of their domestic or international accounts." Brittany scrambled up from the marble floor, her white designer gown stained with spilled champagne, and her knees badly bruised. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, completely ruining her flawless aesthetic. She stared wildly at her husband, her mind incapable of processing the absolute finality of the situation. Her fake empire, her stolen wealth, and her manufactured superiority were vaporizing in front of her eyes. The medical inspectors were sealing her doors. The federal agents were seizing her assets. The wealthy investors were abandoning her. She violently shoved her way past a tall federal agent, ignoring the stern warning to remain in place. She sprinted toward the center of the lobby, her heels sliding precariously on the slick floor. She finally reached Andre, frantically grabbing his tailored sleeve with both of her trembling hands. She dug her sharply manicured fingers deeply into his arm, her blue eyes wide with a manic, terrifying desperation. "Andre, do something, immediately." Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical panic as she shook his arm violently. "Call your bank. Liquidate my offshore accounts. We have to fight this tonight." Brittany's fingers dug so deeply into Andre's tailored charcoal suit that the expensive fabric gathered and creased severely under her manicured claws. She shook his arm, her eyes completely wild, desperately searching his stoic face for the unquestioning, obedient husband she had carefully cultivated and manipulated over the past 3 years. The entire Boston elite, the two federal attorneys and the state medical inspectors, stood in absolute breathless silence, watching the golden child completely unravel in real time. Brittany did not care about the captive audience anymore. Her carefully constructed aesthetic of effortless superiority was entirely annihilated. The champagne stains on her ruined white designer gown perfectly mirrored the ugly, undeniable truth bleeding out into the open room. She desperately needed a powerful savior, and Andre was her final, absolute lifeline. She yanked his sleeve again, her diamond bracelets clinking loudly against his luxury wristwatch. "Call your executive board members right now, Andre." She pleaded, her voice escalating into a shrill, hysterical command that echoed harshly off the soaring marble columns. "You are the senior vice president of commercial lending. You manage billions of dollars in liquid capital every single day. These federal agents are absolutely nothing compared to the ruthless corporate legal team your bank retains on retainer. Tell them there has been a massive, unfortunate misunderstanding. Tell them Clara is just a disgruntled, violently jealous sister launching an illegal corporate sabotage campaign against my brand. Liquidate the offshore Cayman accounts right this second. Transfer the capital into a blind trust, freeze Clara out of the holding company, and bury this ridiculous federal investigation under an avalanche of expensive litigation. You have the power to make this entire nightmare disappear before the press gets a hold of it." Andre did not reach for his smartphone. He did not issue a barrage of aggressive commands to his corporate legal department. He stood perfectly rigid, staring down at the frantic, pathetic woman he had married. The dazzling illusion of the brilliant self-made entrepreneur had completely vanished into thin air. In her place stood a greedy, deeply insecure, incredibly arrogant fraud who was actively demanding he commit federal obstruction of justice simply to cover up a decade of horrific familial theft. He felt a sickening twist in his gut as he rapidly calculated the sheer magnitude of her deception. She had weaponized his love, utilizing his impeccable reputation in the financial sector to legitimize a criminal enterprise built entirely on stolen inheritance and fake medical patents. "You promised to protect me!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking into a ragged sob as she violently shook his arm, yet again small drops of spittle flying from her lips. "You stood at the altar and swore before God and everyone in this room that you would protect my empire from absolutely anyone who tried to tear it down. Do your job as my husband and fix this right now." Andre looked at the hysterical woman he married, absolute unfiltered disgust masking his handsome features. The romantic devotion that had blinded him for 3 years evaporated, leaving behind the cold, calculating precision of a master financial auditor. He brought his own large hands up and placed them firmly over her frantically gripping fingers. He did not shout, nor did he match her chaotic, manic energy. Instead, he operated with chilling, deliberate calmness. He gently but firmly pried her trembling fingers off his suit jacket, physically peeling them away, one by one, as if removing a highly toxic parasite. He took a deliberate backward step, intentionally establishing a stark physical and emotional boundary that hit Brittany significantly harder than a physical blow. "I promised to protect my wife," Andre said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register that carried easily across the dead, silent lobby. "I promised to protect a visionary entrepreneur who confidently told me she built a massive wellness empire through late nights, relentless dedication, and unmatched industry innovation. I did not promise to protect a common thief who funded her shallow vanity projects by stealing a $10 million inheritance from her own flesh and blood." Brittany gasped, stumbling backward on her bruised knees as if he had physically struck her. Andre, please, she whimpered, her empty hands hovering uselessly in the cold air between them. I did it for us. I needed the capital to ensure our perfect future. You did it for your own suffocating pathological ego. Andre countered, his analytical mind completely taking over the confrontation. You lied directly to my face every single day we were together. You brought forged patent documents into my bank and presented them as legitimate assets. You deliberately manipulated me into underwriting a $3 million commercial loan using stolen property as collateral. You did not just steal your sister's future. You actively weaponized our marriage to commit federal bank fraud, placing my entire career, my financial licenses, and my personal freedom directly into the blast radius of your criminal incompetence. Patricia wailed loudly from the corner of the room, finally realizing Andre was not going to deploy his immense resources to save them. Richard buried his face deep into his hands, his broad shoulders shaking in completely defeated surrender. The federal attorneys stood by patiently, allowing the spectacular interpersonal implosion to happen naturally before initiating the formal arrests. I am not calling my corporate legal team to defend you, Andre stated coldly, his eyes locking onto Brittany's terrified face. I am the one who flagged your offshore Cayman accounts for immediate freezing this morning. He slowly reached his right hand deep into his inner breast pocket. His fingers emerged holding a small, sleek object that perfectly caught the harsh glare of the overhead floodlights. He held it up high for the entire room of people to clearly see. He deliberately pulled out a small, encrypted silver USB drive. I did promise to protect you, Brittany, Andre said, his tone entirely devoid of all warmth, until I finally looked closely at your books. Brittany stared at the small silver drive in Andre's hand, as if it were a live explosive. The sheer reality of his sudden discovery finally short-circuited her brain. Her mouth opened silently, her manicured hands dropping limply to her sides. She had spent their entire marriage treating him as a successful accessory, a strong corporate shield, to legitimize her highly fraudulent existence. Now that shield was actively turning into the sword that would completely sever her from her stolen wealth. Andre did not spare her another glance. He ignored the shivering woman kneeling on the ruined marble floor. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket with a sharp movement, turned his broad back on his wife, and walked directly toward the main stage. The heavy silence amplified the confident rhythm of his leather shoes striking the floor. The wealthy investors and paralyzed socialites parted instantly, scrambling out of his way as if he were parting the sea. He ascended the velvet-carpeted stairs with a calm, predatory grace. He bypassed Dr. Thorne and walked straight over to where I was standing. He simply reached out and I handed him the wireless microphone. Standing shoulder to shoulder with me, Andre presented a united, impenetrable front against the family that had tried to destroy us. He looked out over the sea of horrified faces, his dark eyes devoid of hesitation, before shifting his intense gaze directly toward the two federal attorneys. I am Andre Sterling, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending and the involuntary financial guarantor of this criminal enterprise. Andre announced, his deep, resonant voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. I have spent the last 48 hours independently auditing my wife's business accounts, bypassing her heavily doctored internal ledgers to access the raw, unfiltered data routing through our banking network. What I discovered warrants immediate federal prosecution. He held up the encrypted silver USB drive, ensuring the federal agents had a clear, unobstructed view of the evidence. This spa is not a wellness center, Andre stated, his words landing like heavy hammer blows in the silent room. It is a highly sophisticated, meticulously structured shell company. Richard and Patricia have been systematically funneling illicit funds through Brittany's limited liability corporation for the better part of a decade. They utilized this establishment to actively wash the $10 million they stole from Clara 10 years ago, disguising the massive illegal capital injections as anonymous angel investments and inflated daily revenue streams. Patricia let out another sharp, strangled cry, burying her face against the gold-leafed wall. Richard remained entirely rigid, his face twisting into a grotesque mask of trapped, cornered fury. But their financial crimes did not end with simple money laundering, Andre continued, his voice dropping into a colder, more dangerous register. When the stolen trust funds inevitably dried up due to Brittany's catastrophic mismanagement and lavish personal spending, Richard realized the entire fake empire was on the verge of total collapse. They needed a massive influx of legitimate clean capital to keep the doors open and the regulators at bay. So they decided to leverage my corporate position without my knowledge or consent. Andre gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles briefly turning white. Richard and Patricia orchestrated a massive fraudulent commercial loan application. Andre revealed, staring directly at the federal attorneys who were already reaching for their evidence bags. They utilized stolen, uncalibrated medical patents as collateral. But more importantly, they forged my signature as the primary financial guarantor for a $3 million line of credit. They deliberately structured the entire loan agreement so that when this fraudulent SPA inevitably defaulted, the federal government and the banking regulators would look directly at me. They tried to use my signature to take the fall. They intended for me to go to federal prison in their place. The collective shock in the room morphed into palpable physical disgust. The sheer predatory sociopathy of framing one's own son-in-law for a multi-million-dollar federal bank fraud was too much even for the cutthroat Boston elite to stomach. Down on the floor, Richard finally snapped. The meticulously maintained facade of the wealthy, respectable patriarch completely disintegrated, revealing the ugly, rotting core of the man beneath. The absolute loss of control, combined with the realization that a black man had effortlessly dismantled his entire fraudulent legacy, pushed Richard over the edge into pure primal lunacy. His face turned a violent mottled shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged dangerously against his expensive silk collar. He lunged forward, fighting against the two massive security guards who instantly restrained him by the shoulders. "You ungrateful, arrogant animal!" Richard screamed, his voice tearing through the opulent room with startling, ugly violence. The sophisticated mask shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered bigotry. He unleashed a torrent of vile, disgusting racial slurs directly at Andre. The words were so inherently foul, so deeply rooted in venomous prejudice, that several guests actively gasped and covered their ears. Richard thrashed violently against the security contractors, spitting venom, calling Andre a pathetic street thug who was lucky to even breathe the same air as his family. He screamed that Andre was nothing but a hired diversity quota, an incompetent token who had ruined their perfect lives. The hateful, racist vitriol echoed terribly against the crystal chandeliers and gold-leafed ceilings, exposing the absolute bottomless depth of Richard's moral bankruptcy. The federal attorneys visibly stiffened their expressions, hardening into stone as they signaled the nearby uniformed police officers to move in. Up on the stage, Andre did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not break his perfectly composed, immaculate posture. He stood incredibly tall, looking down at the red-faced, screaming, pathetic old man with an expression of supreme, untouchable power. Andre slowly raised the microphone to his lips, his dark, calculating eyes locking onto Richard's wild, panicked gaze. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting for the retaliation. "Your racism is almost as pathetic as your accounting skills, Richard," Andre replied smoothly. The echo of Andre's lethal response hung in the silent air, completely suffocating Richard's racist tirade. The disgraced patriarch stood paralyzed in the grip of the private security contractors, his face a mottled, ugly purple. He opened his mouth to scream another insult, but the words died in his throat as the two federal attorneys stepped forward. They did not even acknowledge his outburst. They moved with the cold, mechanical efficiency of the federal justice system. Andre turned his back on the pathetic old man without a single ounce of hesitation. He extended his large hand holding the encrypted silver USB drive out toward the lead federal agent. The agent, a tall woman with sharp features and a strict demeanor, pulled a clear, sterile evidence bag from her tailored jacket. She held it open. Andre dropped the drive inside. The soft metallic clink of the USB hitting the plastic felt like the final nail being hammered into the coffin of the fake wellness empire. "I have authorized my bank to fully cooperate with the Department of Justice," Andre stated, his voice ringing with absolute unwavering professionalism. That drive contains every single routing number, every hidden Cayman Island account, and a complete unfiltered ledger of the funds Richard and Patricia illegally funneled through this shell company. You will also find the forged loan applications they submitted using my stolen signature. My corporate legal team is already drafting the necessary affidavits. The federal agent sealed the evidence bag with a sharp, decisive zip. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her tone carrying a rare note of genuine professional respect. "This drastically accelerates our timeline." Andre gave a short, rigid nod. He turned his intense, calculating gaze downward. Brittany was still sprawled on the polished marble floor. She was hyperventilating violently, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow gasps. The white designer gown she had worn to celebrate her fraudulent success was now hopelessly tangled around her bruised knees, stained with spilled champagne and smeared makeup. She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide, frantic, and devoid of the smug arrogance she had weaponized for a decade. She looked like a drowning woman reaching for a preserver that was already sinking. "Andre, please," she choked out, her voice a ragged, pathetic whisper. "Please, you cannot do this to me. I am your wife. We took vows. You promised to stand by me. We can fix this. Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you authorized the loan. I will give you whatever you want. I will give you complete control of the spa. Just do not let them take me away." Andre stared down at her, his face a perfectly carved mask of stone. The utter desperation in her voice did not elicit a single shred of sympathy. He saw right through the performance. He saw the exact same manipulative tactics she had used to build her fake empire on the stolen bones of her sister's rightful inheritance. "You do not have a spa to give me, Brittany," Andre replied, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "You never did. You built an illusion using stolen money, and you expected me to provide the legitimate cover story. You looked me in the eyes every night and lied about your brilliance, your late nights at the office, and your self-made success. You used my name, my reputation, and my credit to shield your family's criminal enterprise." He crouched down slightly, ensuring his words were delivered with maximum, inescapable clarity. He did not touch her. He kept a strict physical boundary, treating her like a hazardous biological contaminant. "My lawyers will serve you the divorce papers in the morning," Andre stated, the finality of his words slicing through her hysterical sobs. "I have already frozen our joint accounts, canceled your supplementary credit cards, and instructed my building security that you are permanently banned from the premises. Do not ever contact me or my family again. You are absolutely nothing to me now." Brittany let out a harrowing, guttural shriek. She lunged forward, trying to grab his tailored slacks, but Andre effortlessly stepped back, leaving her clawing at empty air. He straightened his posture, adjusting his cuffs with the grace of a man who had just finalized a highly profitable corporate merger. He did not spare a single backward glance at the ruined woman weeping on the floor. Andre turned and walked directly down the center aisle of the grand lobby. The gathered crowd of wealthy investors, local politicians, and paralyzed socialites scrambled out of his way, parting like the Red Sea. He moved as an untouchable force of dignity and power, his heavy leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble until he pushed through the main glass doors and disappeared into the cool Boston night. The sound of the heavy doors swinging shut triggered a cascade of immediate, devastating consequences. The federal attorneys turned their attention fully to Richard. One agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The sharp metallic ratcheting sound echoed loudly as the cuffs were tightly secured around Richard's wrists. The former patriarch offered no resistance. His arrogant, racist bluster had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, broken old man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Watching from the corner of the room, Patricia finally broke her catatonic freeze. Her entire meticulously crafted reality had been utterly vaporized in less than 20 minutes. Her husband was in federal custody. Her golden child, Brittany, was hyperventilating in a puddle of spilled champagne, disowned by a powerful husband and facing imminent arrest. The stolen $10 million was gone. The social standing she craved was permanently destroyed. She had absolutely no one left to save her. No one except the daughter she had spent 10 years actively destroying. Patricia dropped heavily to her knees, her expensive silk dress bunched up around her waist as she began to physically crawl across the floor toward Clara. Patricia's silk gown, an imported designer piece meant to project absolute superiority, caught on a jagged edge of the shattered champagne flute left on the polished marble floor. The fabric tore with a loud, distinct rip, but she did not stop. She scrambled forward on her bare hands and bruised knees, totally discarding every single ounce of her carefully cultivated high society dignity. The wealthy socialites and business moguls who had kissed her cheek just an hour ago now took physical steps back in sheer horror, actively pulling their expensive evening wear away from her to avoid the contamination of her ruined status. Patricia did not care about the whispering crowd anymore. The terrifying, undeniable reality of an extended federal prison sentence loomed directly in front of her face. The harsh clinking sound of steel handcuffs firmly securing her husband's wrists echoed loudly off the vaulted ceiling, rapidly accelerating her desperate, pathetic crawl. She reached my feet, her hands shooting out to frantically grab the heavy velvet fabric of my gown. Her trembling fingers curled into tight fists, violently twisting the dark green material, as if it were the only tether keeping her from plunging into an abyss. She looked up at me, her applied makeup running in dark, ugly streaks down her cheeks. The arrogant matriarch who had spent the last 10 years treating me like an inconvenient burden was completely gone. In her place was a weeping, terrified mess gasping for air. "Please, Clara," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch that forced the remaining guests into a breathless silence. "We are your parents. We gave you life. You can't let them send us to federal prison. We'll give you the house, we'll give you everything." I stared down at the trembling woman gripping my dress. I felt no pity, no familial obligation, and zero sorrow. The emotional manipulation that used to paralyze me felt powerless. I looked at her hands, the same hands that had smoothly signed the forged documents transferring my $10 million inheritance into Brittany's shell company. I looked at her tear-streaked face, remembering the cold, mocking smile she wore the day she told me I was too unrefined to ever understand the intricacies of our grand family legacy. "You did not give me a life, Mom," I replied, my voice steady, carrying a sharp, resonant clarity across the quiet lobby. "You gave me a debt. You gave me a decade of psychological torment while you utilized my grandfather's trust fund to finance a fraudulent empire for your favorite child. You watched Richard steal my future, and you helped him hide the stolen money." Patricia shook her head, her hands tightening their grip on my dress. "No, Clara, you do not understand the pressure we were under. We were trying to build something lasting for all of us. Brittany needed the capital to establish the brand, but we always planned to pay you back. We never intended for it to go this far. You have to believe me. Tell the federal agents this is a private family dispute. Tell them you refuse to press charges. If you testify against us, they will lock us away for the rest of our lives." The sheer unmitigated audacity of her request was staggering. Even as federal agents were leading her disgraced husband toward the exit, Patricia was still attempting to gaslight me into submission. She was still relying on the toxic expectation that I would sacrifice my own well-being just to protect the sterling family reputation. "You plan to pay me back by framing Andre for federal bank fraud?" I asked, taking a deliberate backward step, forcing her to either let go of my dress or be physically dragged across the hard floor. "You plan to pay me back by taking out a $3 million commercial loan using fake medical patents as collateral. That is not a family dispute, Mom. That is a highly sophisticated criminal conspiracy, and you maliciously orchestrated every single part of it." Across the massive room, the lead federal agent finished loudly reading Richard his formal Miranda rights. Richard's face was completely drained of all color as two uniformed police officers firmly guided him toward the heavy glass doors. Patricia watched her husband being marched out in disgrace, a fresh wave of panic violently convulsing her entire body. She turned back to me, her eyes wide with a feral absolute terror. "Clara, I am begging you," Patricia cried out, pressing her damp forehead directly against my shins. "We raised you. We fed you. We put a solid roof over your head. You owe us this small mercy. If you do not stop them right now, they will aggressively seize all our financial assets. They will take the Beacon Hill estate. We will be completely homeless. We will have absolutely nothing left. I will sign the property deed over to you right this very second. Just call off the lawyers. We'll give you the house, we'll give you everything. The federal attorneys began moving deliberately toward Patricia, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the cold marble. The legal net was closing in rapidly. The entire Boston elite watched with breathless anticipation, completely captivated by the total annihilation of the Sterling family's deeply fraudulent patriarch and matriarch. I looked down at the violently sobbing woman at my feet. I calmly absorbed the full weight of her desperate, pathetic bargaining chip. She was literally trying to buy her freedom with the very assets she had illegally purchased, using my stolen money. I reached down and firmly pried her trembling fingers off my velvet gown, mirroring the exact physical boundary Andre had established with Brittany just moments earlier. I stood tall, letting the heavy silence stretch for a brief, agonizing second before finally delivering the crushing blow to her completely shattered reality. I looked down at my mother, my expression completely devoid of mercy. "You can't give me the house, Mom. You don't own it." Patricia stared upward, her tear-soaked face freezing into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Her mouth opened, pulling oxygen into her lungs in ragged, uneven gasps, but no sound emerged. She slowly retracted her hands from the velvet of my gown, her fingers curling inward as if she had just touched a burning stove. The luxury venue remained completely dead silent, save for the distant sound of a police cruiser door slamming shut outside. Richard was gone, hauled away in federal custody, leaving Patricia entirely defenseless on the cold floor. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her comfort. I simply looked down at the woman who had birthed me, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of absolute justice settling into my bones. I reached a steady hand into the inner breast pocket of my tailored bleached white blazer. My fingers brushed against thick, heavy parchment paper. I withdrew a formidable legal document bound by a dark blue cover sheet and heavily stamped with red municipal seals. I held it up, allowing the harsh glare of the crystal chandeliers to illuminate the undeniable reality of her total ruin. Patricia's eyes darted frantically toward the document, her pupils dilating with fresh terror. She did not know exactly what she was looking at, but her survival instincts clearly signaled that it was the instrument of her final destruction. 3 years ago, you took out a massive secondary mortgage on the family mansion to fund Brittany's lifestyle, I stated, my voice ringing with clinical surgical precision. You realized the stolen trust funds were rapidly depleting because your golden child was burning through capital faster than she could launder it. Her designer wardrobes, her exotic vacations, the constant suffocating need to project an image of effortless superiority required a massive amount of cash. So you decided to leverage the only legitimate asset you had left. You gambled the very roof over your heads just to keep up appearances. Brittany whimpered from her pathetic position on the floor, her ruined white dress pooling around her bruised knees. She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to face the devastating truth being broadcast to the entire Boston elite. You assumed Brittany's fake spa would eventually turn a profit and cover the exorbitant monthly payments. I continued, taking a deliberate step forward, forcing Patricia to crane her neck backward. But a business built entirely on fraud and theft does not generate actual revenue. It only consumes. Within 18 months, the inevitable happened. You defaulted. The bank sold the debt to a collection firm, JM Investment Group. Patricia let out a low, agonizing moan, wrapping her arms around her own torso. The surrounding guests, the same wealthy socialites who had attended Patricia's lavish dinner parties at that exact mansion, exchanged horrified, disgusted whispers. The illusion of the untouchable family wealth had been violently shattered. You ignored the warning letters. I said, my tone flat and relentless. You ignored the persistent phone calls from the bank. You desperately tried to hide your insolvency from your country club friends, prioritizing your fake social standing over basic financial survival. When the bank finally realized they were never going to recover their money, they initiated standard procedures. They aggressively wrote off the toxic loan to recoup their losses. Patricia blinked, her chest heaving as she desperately tried to connect the dots. The name of the holding company meant absolutely nothing to her. She had spent her entire life ignoring financial details, leaving the dirty work of managing money to Richard. But I had spent the last decade meticulously studying every single aspect of wealth management, building an ironclad fortress of legitimate capital. I tracked your debt the moment it hit the secondary market, I explained, looking directly into Patricia's terrified eyes. I watched the bank offload your massive liability for pennies on the dollar. I monitored the transaction as the collection firm acquired the legal rights to the estate. I waited patiently while the firm navigated the complex, grueling municipal foreclosure process. You fought them in court, attempting to delay the inevitable, but you had absolutely no legal ground to stand on. I slowly lowered the heavy document deliberately, holding it just inches from Patricia's trembling face, making sure she could read the bold, black lettering printed clearly across the top of the very first official page. You thought you could outsmart the system, I continued softly, ensuring every single word penetrated her panic. You thought you could simply ignore the eviction warnings and rely on Richard's corrupt connections to keep the sheriffs away. You believed your inherent superiority would somehow shield you from the consequences of your extreme greed. But you never bothered to investigate the private equity firm that bought your debt. You never bothered to look at the board of directors. Patricia let out a sharp gasp, her eyes widening to impossible proportions. The realization finally struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire body shook as she stared up at the daughter she had ruthlessly discarded, the daughter she had deemed too unrefined to matter. I spent years building my own legitimate wealth. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the room. I utilized my resources to quietly purchase a massive controlling stake in JM Investment Group last year. I personally directed the brilliant legal team to aggressively finalize the municipal foreclosure proceedings. I made absolutely certain that every piece of critical paperwork was impeccably filed, leaving you no loopholes, no extensions, and zero room for any kind of negotiation. I opened my hand and released the heavy stamped parchment. It fluttered downward through the quiet air with finality. She stared down at the deed of foreclosure as if it were a venomous snake, too terrified to even touch the paper that confirmed her total destitution. I dropped the foreclosure notice onto Patricia's lap. I own the debt. I own the house. And the eviction notice took effect at midnight. Patricia stared at the municipal foreclosure deed in her lap, as if it were laced with lethal poison. The bold ink, confirming the absolute loss of the Sterling estate, mocked the decades she had spent cultivating an image of aristocratic superiority. Her manicured fingers hovered over the document, violently trembling, unable to touch the physical proof of her total destitution. She had gambled her ancestral home to finance Brittany's fraudulent vanity project, entirely convinced her social standing would forever insulate her from the harsh realities of debt collection. Now the absolute finality of the midnight eviction notice shattered that lifelong delusion. She was not just bankrupt. She was entirely homeless, stripped of the walls that shielded her arrogance. The realization hit her with the crushing force of a freight train. She looked up at me, finally understanding that I had systematically dismantled every pillar of her highly privileged existence. The suffocating silence in the lobby was shattered by the sharp command of the lead federal agent. She stepped forward, her shoes clicking aggressively against the ruined marble floor, signaling the immediate end of the Sterling family's reign. Two armed federal marshals flanked her, moving with the cold efficiency of the justice system. They bypassed the stunned crowd and descended directly upon Richard. The disgraced patriarch tried to physically recoil, but the marshals were incredibly swift. One agent forcefully grabbed Richard's tailored shoulder, spinning him around with zero regard for his former status, while the other violently yanked his arms behind his back. The metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around Richard's wrists echoed like a gunshot. The lead attorney stood directly in front of him, her voice ringing with absolute authority as she officially charged him with multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud, federal money laundering, and criminal bank conspiracy. Richard squeezed his eyes shut in total absolute defeat, Patricia watched her husband being physically restrained like a common criminal, the sight breaking the last fragile thread of her sanity. She let out a piercing shriek that forced several guests to cover their ears. She scrambled wildly on the floor, desperately trying to crawl away from the advancing officers, her torn silk gown tangling around her bruised knees. But there was nowhere left to run. Two female federal agents swiftly descended upon her, gripping her flailing arms with practiced strength. Patricia thrashed violently against their hold, kicking her heels against the marble floor, screaming that she was a poor victim, that they were making a catastrophic mistake. The agents ignored her hysterical pleas entirely. They forced her arms behind her back, the second pair of steel handcuffs snapping shut with terrifying finality. As the agents loudly read Patricia, her rights officially charging her as a co-conspirator in the massive financial fraud, her screaming morphed into a ragged, uncontrollable wailing that stripped away the very last ounce of her manufactured dignity. A few feet away from the chaotic arrests, Brittany sat paralyzed in the epicenter of her annihilated empire. The dazzling illusion of the brilliant wellness entrepreneur had been totally eradicated, leaving behind a profoundly empty, insecure fraud. She was slumped against the base of a shattered crystal display case, her ruined white designer dress soaking up the spilled champagne and stagnant water from the triggered sprinklers. In her trembling right hand, she mindlessly clutched a glossy promotional brochure for the spa, a piece of thick cardstock advertising non-existent medical treatments that had never actually worked. For the past decade, she had existed inside a massive echo chamber of stolen wealth, actively utilizing my stolen inheritance to fund her lavish narcissism. She had genuinely believed she was fundamentally untouchable, completely insulated by her parents' money and her husband's corporate protection. Now staring blankly at the meaningless brochure, the crushing weight of her reality finally descended upon her shoulders. She was utterly destitute, facing massive, crippling, fraudulent debt. Andre had permanently abandoned her. She was completely, entirely alone. I stood perfectly still amidst the swirling chaos, watching the absolute destruction of the people who had actively spent my entire life trying to break me. I did not feel a single drop of remorse. I felt a profound, deeply satisfying sense of total closure. The toxic chains that had bound me to the Sterling family name were finally permanently severed. I calmly reached up and adjusted the collar of my bleached blazer, smoothing the fabric with a steady, deliberate hand. I turned my back on the hysterical screaming of my mother and the defeated silence of my father. I walked slowly and purposefully down the grand center aisle of the lobby. The remaining guests, the very people who had openly mocked my appearance just an hour ago, now parted instantly, lowering their eyes in sheer undeniable fear. They recognized the apex predator in the room. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the spa, stepping out into the cool Boston night air. The atmosphere tasted incredibly clean, entirely purged of the suffocating lies that had previously defined my entire existence. A small fleet of federal transport vehicles and marked police cruisers idled aggressively at the curb, completely blocking the valet drop-off lane. I paused at the top of the grand exterior staircase, crossing my arms over my chest, as the heavy glass doors opened behind me. The federal marshals forcefully marched Richard and Patricia out of the building. My parents were completely unrecognizable, their heads bowed in total, inescapable humiliation as they were shoved unceremoniously into the back of a heavily armored federal transport van. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a resounding permanent thud, officially locking them away from the privileged world they had so ruthlessly exploited. I watched the transport van pull away from the curb, merging slowly into the dense city traffic. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers strobed intensely through the dark night, rhythmically illuminating the bleached stains on my jacket, as the antagonists were driven away into the night. Exactly 6 months had passed since the flashing lights of the federal transport vans faded into the cold Boston night, taking my corrupt parents away to face their criminal trial. I stood silently on the top floor of the JM Research Hospital. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of the downtown skyline. This plot of land once held the abandoned structure my family tried to steal to fund their vanity projects. Now it housed a state-of-the-art medical facility. The transformation was absolute. The hum of legitimate scientific progress echoed through the corridors below me. We were no longer hiding assets or laundering money through wellness spas. We were funding clinical trials, hiring researchers, and building an institution grounded in truth and transparency. I rested my hand against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the ventilation systems. Every brick, every piece of advanced surgical equipment, and every physician represented a definitive victory over the toxic empire my parents tried to force upon me. I did not just survive their warfare, I used the resources they attempted to plunder to build an enduring legacy of my own. The Sterling family name, once a symbol of arrogance, had been erased from the city's elite circles. In its rightful place, the JM brand stood as a testament to resilience, integrity, and the power of refusing to be broken. The heavy oak door to my executive suite clicked open. Andre walked in dressed in a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate respect. He carried a silver tablet under his arm. 6 months ago, he was trapped in a fraudulent marriage, positioned as the scapegoat for Richard and Patricia's financial crimes. Today, he was the chief financial officer of my hospital network. He crossed the room with confident, measured steps, stopping beside my desk. We exchanged a silent smile of mutual respect. We had both been discarded by the same toxic family, utilized as mere pawns in their desperate game of survival. Instead of letting that shared trauma destroy us, we had weaponized it. We pooled our knowledge, our resources, and our relentless drive to tear down their corrupt foundation and erect something stronger. Andre tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up a series of complex financial spreadsheets and verified legal trust documents. The profit numbers were staggering, but completely legitimate. The hospital was already operating at a massive surplus, easily outperforming every initial projection we had established during the grueling construction phase. He did not need to manipulate data or forge signatures to make the balance sheets look impressive. He simply managed the massive influx of clean capital generated by actual tangible medical innovation. He handed the tablet directly to me, gently tapping a specific file highlighted in bright neon green. "It is fully finalized," Andre stated, his voice remarkably steady and professional. "The medical board unanimously approved the initial multi-million-dollar endowment transfer this morning. The allocated funds are officially locked into the trust, completely shielded from any external taxation or corporate interference." I looked down at the glowing digital document. It was the formal, legally binding charter for the JM Medical Scholarship Fund. We had spent the last 3 grueling months carefully designing the exact parameters of the unprecedented program. This was not a standard grant based purely on arbitrary academic metrics or standardized test scores. It was a highly specialized financial lifeline, specifically engineered for aspiring medical students who completely lacked any form of familial support. We actively sought out the brilliant minds who had been disowned, maliciously abandoned, or financially cut off by their own toxic parents. We deliberately targeted the resilient individuals who were currently working 3 minimum wage jobs just to afford basic textbooks, the desperate students who literally slept in their cars while fighting for a highly competitive seat in a medical laboratory. I scrolled slowly through the final verified terms. The massive fund provided total tuition coverage, a generous monthly living stipend, and guaranteed residency placement within our prestigious hospital network upon graduation. No ambitious, capable student would ever have to beg a toxic parent for basic educational funding again. They would never have to compromise their dignity or endure endless psychological abuse just to pursue their genuine passion. I signed my name across the digital line with a swift, decisive stroke, cementing the endowment into permanent, unbreakable existence. I handed the silver tablet back to Andre. He gave a firm, respectful nod, fully recognizing the profound weight of what we had just successfully accomplished together, and silently exited the grand office to execute the immediate wire transfers. Left alone in the quiet expanse of my executive suite, I turned my attention away from the sweeping city view and looked directly at the opposite wall. Hanging proudly inside a custom museum-grade glass shadow box was my old tailored blazer. The dark fabric was permanently ruined, covered entirely in the harsh, jagged, undeniable bleach stains that Brittany had maliciously thrown onto me the night of her disastrous gala. My mother had aggressively demanded that I take it off, screaming that I was a total embarrassment, a hideous blemish on their perfectly curated aesthetic. She was absolutely right. I was a massive blemish on their pathetic world of lies, and I wore that ruined jacket as a magnificent, glorious badge of honor. It was the exact armor I wore when I masterfully orchestrated their total financial and social destruction. It represented the precise moment I stopped trying to earn their impossible love and started fiercely fighting for my own survival. The bleach had permanently destroyed the delicate fabric, but it had entirely failed to destroy me. I stepped closer to the protective glass, silently studying the chaotic, violently splattered patterns. They were a vivid, permanent reminder of the past, but they no longer held any power over my present. Family isn't blood. Family doesn't bleach your dreams. Family is who stands by you when you wear the ruins and helps you turn them into an empire.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly, I am